Adrian is also known as the subconscious surgeon, and he's bringing some perspectives on how do you actually apply kinesiology. And actually, Adrian, you will need to explain to us what is that actually to work on performance and I guess mental fitness. Natalia is cheering because we gave her a voice. Natalia, you are also being heard. We actually have space to accommodate everyone's voices here. It's just that the speaking stage is limited in time. That's why we hopefully can use the chat. Adrian, let me give you the co-hosting rights, and then you can unmute yourself and start sharing. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Am I there? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can even feel you.
Well, of course. Thank you. And hello to everybody here from Bali, Indonesia. And Natalia was going kind of all frantic because she was waving a crystal at you, and that was what I gave her at Burning Man several years ago. So it was beautiful to see her again, and thank you for your enthusiasm, Natalia. So subconscious surgery. This has been one of my passions, one of my vocation, probably like, you know, a number of other people on this platform, is, you know, how do we improve humanity? How do we heal people? How do we evolve as a species? And it is an augmented reality in you know, that we live in. Our subconscious mind is the AI which augments it, and it puts layers of perception of how we view reality and how we view our relationships with all different aspects of our life, and through these emotional patterns and responses and belief systems. I'm sure, you know, a lot of people on here know this kind of stuff already. And my pursuit over kind of a dedicated pursuit over the last 7 years, really. I mean, it's been probably 30 years, you know, culminating. I've always been fascinated about humans. When I was a very young child, I was very sensitive to people's energies, and I could read people and tell them things about themselves that they've kind of hardly admitted to themselves, never mind other people. And humans always confuse me because they had this facade, this front that they portrayed to the world, but they were operating differently inside them. You know, they had these insecurities, and they had these triggers and self-worth issues and things like that. But they might have attempted to exude this different kind of perception for others. And it's a process of that I've been exploring, is deciphering that, is how do we navigate this, and how do we dissect all these aspects of our psychological kind of makeup and unstitch them in a way which then changes our perceptual nature. You know, in essence, it's the limbic system, and it's changing that neurochemistry. The neurochemistry is, you know, a big facilitator in switching hormones in the brain, and, you know, awareness patterns, and you know, it's in essence what we call feelings. So after kind of researching for kind of decades in this area, and, you know, attempting to figure out, you know, excuse my terminology, but I kind of call it the bastard child of my own rehabilitation, which I'm sure there's a lot of practitioners out there which have gone on this journey because they're seeking ways of healing themselves. And I'd kind of understood all these aspects in principle, anecdotally. I've kind of researched, you know, so much things about it over decades that I kind of understood it, but in my life, I still had some dysfunctional aspects. I started businesses, and then I chose the wrong employees, or I chose the wrong business partners, or I would suffer stress and anxiety in certain situations. And if we look at, we are creating our own reality. I knew I was creating that reality, but I wasn't sure what I was doing wrong in that process to create it. And this is where I came across the powerful tool of kinesiology, muscle testing. And it is through the application of this and various frameworks, we can basically dissect and go through processes where we can check and measure. Now, I don't know if anybody here has been playing with kinesiology or muscle testing. There are various different ways you can access this. In fact, there's technologies that are being developed that the phone that you're kind of using, maybe to watch this talk, is going to be able to use to do muscle testing. The accelerometers in the phone can actually notice differences in muscle tone. So if you have a particular intention, if you think a particular phrase as if it's true to you, if it's not true, if it goes against your core beliefs, basically you will suffer what we call cognitive dissonance. This is a conflict in the algorithm in the brain. And that comes out as an incongruency and a perturbation in the muscle's reflex patterns. There's also, I'm working with a very powerful voice tech software, which has been developed by a scientist in Holland, which I'm kind of working with closely. And the voice tech can, with a 2-minute sample of your voice, let you know your muscle acidity, your organ function, your vitamin and mineral profile, your Myers-Briggs profile, your Enneagram, how happy you are, how sad you are, how lonely you are, whether you think your mother or father was you as a child, whether you've got dyslexia, ADHD, diabetes, and all sorts. And the idea would be to create a virtual, in essence, what I call a subconscious surgery. It's a deductive process. It's a way of, testing language to your system and seeing what language kind of causes that cognitive dissonance and what descriptions. It's the narrative which is kind of happening within us that we need to establish. So using this deductive process, we can literally get down to granular levels of detail of like how old you were when things started, who caused it, the part of the body that's affected. So we're tapping into what we call the psychosomatic element of this relationship. Psycho is obviously the mind, soma being the body. So it's how your mind affects your body. And this is in essence where the nocebo and the placebo effects come from. We have a particular emotion, a particular belief, and that's stored in the body. There's a book by Candace Pert called Molecules of Emotion. She was a very famous neural pharmacologist. In fact, one of her very interesting discoveries was neural peptides are frequencies of vibration. And the old biological function of like the lock and key and a chemical kind of interaction was kind of dispelled with that. It's a cymatic expression, it's a change of energy. But the neurochemical makeup of your body, in essence, is the environment that's in. This is the epigenetics kind of thing. It's the environment that you create in your body which creates illness. And the primary contributing factor to that is your psychology. Deepak Chopra's work showed that about 80 to 90% of illness is psychosomatic. So a huge part of healthcare I see moving forward in the future is going to be delving into that psychology. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily explored as much in the kind of the normal medical care systems at the moment. There is obviously an element if you go to explore it, but if you go in for a dysfunctioning kidney or liver or back pain or things like that, they really tackle just the physical side of it, the symptoms, rather than potentially the contributing factor to those symptoms, which is the psychology itself. And if we understand that the body is attempting to communicate to us all the time, sorry, I didn't get that message. How do I see these messages? Can you hear me now? What was happening?
We can hear you. All good?
All right. Somebody left a message saying about background noise or something like that, did they? Okay. Sorry, I was just distracted there for a second from one of the messages. I can't see where the messages are. So every part of your body has language attached to it. Yeah, your shoulders are about bearing burdens. It's a lot of them are quite intuitive. Your left one is family, your right one is financial. Your liver's your anger center. Your knees are about flexibility in life. Your feet are about moving forwards. So your body's attempting to communicate to you all the time. It's attempting to tell you what's going on within your psychology, and it's a physical expression of that. It's saying, look, you're stressed about this, or you've got a belief about that, and this is the language in which way I'm attempting to show you that the psychology is embedded in your system. And what we can do is use that language of that part of the body or that illness to then process out the emotional trauma and the belief systems that are attached to it. And that's kind of what subconscious surgery is. That the scalpel, so to speak, is language itself. Language is an incredibly powerful part of our lives. The way we form sentences, the type of language we use. Are we using claiming language, which is a one that is a very common mistake people have? They talk about my illness or my problems, or one thing that I often do is, and we have probably all experienced people talking about doing affirmations, and we see affirmations as something that you design a particular statement, and then you wake up in the morning and you go through your affirmations, and you might do it at night, or find some time during the day, and you kind of repeat verbatim these statements in an attempt to reprogram things. Now, from the research that I've found, and over the years with a lot of my clients, is affirmations don't necessarily work all the time. You get a lot of people that read all the books and say all the phrases and don't really get many functional changes. And the way you've got to look at it is that it's, to some degree, if you've got a fundamental core belief that's in your system, no matter how much you tell yourself, it's a bit of a dull tool. It doesn't really get traction of that shifting. There need to be other modalities involved in doing so. But as Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is not an act, but a habit. So any repeating narratives that we, innately do, and these are the kind of the claiming languages that we have. If we do something wrong, we call ourselves an idiot. Oh, God, I always do that. And if you look at your mind a bit like the proverbial genie, it says your wish is my command. It basically gives you exactly what it is that you're wanting. It's called confirmation bias in psychology. And that's the augmented reality. It's the old classic when people go buy a car and go, and they suddenly start seeing them everywhere. The reticular activating system, the kind of Google search engine in the mind, which seeks out information and data to what we do is we're told confirmation bias, selective attention, selective awareness, we start picking out the information within our awareness field that is prudent to, that we've just bought the car. Now, you think all of a sudden you see them everywhere, but they were there before. You just had no reason to pick them out. Your ocular cavities are 475 megapixel cameras taking up to 60 frames per second. It's like 65 gigabytes of data per second, which is an incredible amount of information. But the challenge is the conscious mind, the bit that I'm speaking to now, can only process about 40 bits of information per second, 40. Not gigabytes, not megabytes, just bits. So we have a limitation of, where we can divide our awareness. So our subconscious takes over a large part of that functionality. And this is why, we'll sit down and go, oh, and actually it was a bit of fluff. We thought it was a spider. We're scared of spiders. It looked like a spider in our peripherals, and our immediate fight or flight response is that could be danger and we need to prepare for it. And in essence, that's what's happening to us all the time through our lives, through this internal augmented, dialogue of what it's portraying onto it, what our selective awareness patterns are looking for. So if we're insecure about something, then when we're talking to somebody, we might look for mannerisms like they're not interested. Yeah. It might be they're tired, and lethargic, but we suddenly think that they're bored and not interested. And once we start debugging those from the system and removing them, those anxieties basically subside, and they no longer have an impact on your reality, because you're no longer needing to validate that. You're no longer needing to seek that out and identify the areas where that supports the belief. So, this is kind of the main ideal, obviously, for modalities, is to get rid of the trauma within the system, within the body, and change that level of perception. So I like to do things kind of interactive and things like that. So if anybody's got any questions they want to throw to me, they're most welcome. If you've got any personal things as well, questions about things in your life, there's a process of testing. I can direct you in the right areas. So if you have any physical ailments, any diseases, looking into the psychology, into the language, into the kind of the meta description of that part of the body and that particular illness can be, first, to a degree, transformative. It can bring your awareness patterns into certain aspects of your life, which in essence are needing that recoding, needing that kind of reset, so to speak. And the ultimate goal would be, one of the challenges with being a practitioner is that you can only work on so many people, doing one-to-one, and it's a reduced scalability. And this is where, if we're able to use these potential tools like the kinesiology app, the voice analytics, and then have a deductive process and have an AI, a machine learning engine behind it, we could literally make a virtual psychologist, which could create a way of identifying the psychology, creating a way of processing it out, and then measuring, objectively, whether that's had a functional effect on your system. You may have an experiential effect, where the anxiety, the stress, the fear has subsided. But in essence, a way of objectively measuring it, so we can then store those processing techniques And then when other people kind of come onto the technology and they have similar psychology, we can then cross-pollinate those processing techniques and, in essence, then measure whether they will work on other people. And eventually we would have a huge database of processes, techniques, modalities, and this can be opened up to all sorts of practitioners out there. And we could create a platform which would make psychotherapy a lot more affordable for the masses. You know, if you were able to access it through your phone, through an app, and it wasn't reliant on another practitioner on the other side, but an algorithm, in essence, you could impact, you know, millions of lives. The scalability is obviously vastly increased. And this is kind of where I've been exploring the power of the voice analytics. On many clients, I've been doing before and afters. So, and when we look at the voice recording, the output afterwards, it can actually identify the area of psychology and biology that I have affected, that I have improved, that I have reprogrammed, so to speak. And that will apply to, you know, any practitioner out there on the market, and any modality, any retreats, any coaches, any energy healers, Reiki, whatever it might be. You know, it's getting those objective, measurable tools so we can quantify and identify and verify that something has been achieved in that process. And this is where the ultimate kind of goal of this would be, is then putting that on the blockchain and tokenizing it. If people are investing in themselves, investing in modalities, investing in working with practitioners, or even working with technologies to debug their system, get rid of trauma, improve their health, potentially, you know, it can advise on changes in diet and see functional changes within that, because it can actually do vitamin and mineral profiles in that. We can then, in essence, they become more valuable to society. You know, they become less of a burden. They won't need the medical systems as much. They won't need medications as much. They won't need, you know, looking after as much emotionally and physically. They will then, as they improve themselves, you know, you cannot give what you don't have, but as they start to achieve these life skills and health skills and psychological skills, they become, you know, more productive to society. They are able to contribute more and actually be of service and give. So your intrinsic value would go up. So tokenizing it is basically the proof of work concept, using these different ways of quantifying that process and that upscaling kind of bit by bit. And then maybe we can incentivize people to do that and make their net worth higher as they go through the process. So I don't know what I'm like for time. I think I've got a 30-minute slot. We've got 5 minutes. I'd like to leave a bit of time.
5 minutes. No problem.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about leaving a bit of time open for some questions. If anybody wants to kind of ask anything about the technologies or the way it works or anything like that. One challenge I have on here is I'm not entirely sure how to access the messages.
One question from Yip.
Yeah. Oh,
What
if you could
actually
help me,
got you to
great.
this?
Could you repeat?
What actually got you to this practice, like kinesiology?
Well, it was kind of an interesting experience. I had just gone through one of the biggest kind of upheavals in my life. I had a very successful renewable energy company in the UK. This was in 2011. You know, and we were nearly doubling in turnover every 3 months. We were doing, 400,000 US a week, about 70,000 profit. And the UK government, in its wisdom, decided to change all the policies, and it totally destroyed the industry. And everything that I'd put into it was destroyed overnight, which was a very painful experience. I lost a hell of a lot of money. My partner of 11 years left me because of it as well. And I had all sorts of turbulence with my ex-wife, and I went through a place of cognitive shock, and I was suicidal at one point, and I thought I had some kind of brain disorder because my brain stopped working. I always identified as being reasonably intelligent, and I just couldn't think. And I kind of went on that healing journey, and I spent a year convalescing, and then I decided to kind of go out, and I watched the film The Secret, and there was a guy called Jack Canfield on there. I wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and a book called The Success Principles. And he kind of stood out in all of the practitioners on the on The Secret, the film. So I decided to engage in a process, and it was a little bit of an experiment with my life. I was kind of at the worst point. I'd lost everything. I was, incredibly in debt. And I had literally £100 to my name at the time. And I was like, okay, it's an $18,000 course plus flights plus accommodation. If this law of attraction kind of stuff works, then I'm meant to be there, I'm going to be there. And crazy stuff happened when I set that intention. I ended up going on the training and the flights and everything like that. Just magic and miracles manifested everything. And I got talking to Jack Canfield himself, and told him about all the things that I want to do and want to achieve and things like that. And he introduced me to his mentor. And basically, his mentor he met quite a number of years before, and he was struggling to launch Chicken Soup for the Soul. He'd been to 130 publishers, been rejected by them all, and this guy, Dr. John, had come to one of his trainings, and he told him about it, what he could do, and the muscle testing. And doing the muscle testing, he identified that Jack had a limiting belief around money, and that he had this glass ceiling, theoretical ceiling at 2 million a year. Above 2 million a year, he had an emotional trigger, which was related to his father and actually being accepted and things like that. And Jack's response was like, oh my God, he said, for the last 10 years, I've been just below 2 million a year, like 1.9, 1.8, 1.7, 1.9, 1.8. And I've just never been able to break the 2 million mark. So processing that out and getting that out of his system, literally 3 weeks later, he got a contract for 65 million for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And it became later the largest grossing book in history, beating Stephen King, having the 8 titles in the New York Times top 10 bestsellers list at one time. And I listened to the story and I was like, I need some of that. So I went to Dr. John, and he taught me the process and, all the stuff that he'd learned, and the power of what it potentially can do. It's a way of tapping into your innate, your core inner knowing. And it seems to be able to tap into our deep intuition that's connected to the whole. And I've been able to predict future events using it to a very, very high level of accuracy. Now, when I learned all this from Dr. John, I was incredibly skeptical. I was like, how can this possibly work? So I spent 2 years kind of being devil's advocate. I would test something and then see what happened in reality. I would test things on clients and see what their responses were, and then go through the process of programming out and see what their experience was. And that's kind of the a very quick kind of story of what kind of led me in there. It was that personal journey of rehabilitation for myself and finding a way of healing. And I've always wanted to. I've known for a teenager that eventually in my life I would be doing what I'm doing now. I saw it as a very clear vision. But I knew I needed life experience and I needed to sort things out with myself. But that journey into really exploring kinesiology on a very deep level, I mean, using it, multiple times a day, for the last 7 years, even muscle testing things like, in a new restaurant, is this, which dish am I going to enjoy the most? Scoring them out of 1 to 10 and then eating it and seeing, well, was that a 9? Was it a 10? Was it a 7? I would muscle test. So one of my challenges I mentioned previously was employing the right people. My kind of, I would look at them and go, I like them. They seem to have the skills. I'll give them a go. And then they would end up being useless or ripping me off or underhand, things like that. And using the muscle testing, I've now been doing kind of interviews with that. I think we're coming to the end of my session.
Yeah, we need
but
to
I did interviews.
wrap it up.
Yeah. So I did interviews basically using the kinesiology without actually using the person. And the person, when employed, did exactly the same as what the muscle testing did. It was quite amazing. So that's a quick wrapping it up there.
Thank you so much.